The summer heat pressed down on Millbrook like a heavy blanket, turning the asphalt soft and making the air shimmer above the parking lot of Romano's Diner. Sarah Mitchell wiped down the counter for the third time that afternoon, her mind elsewhere as it often was these days. Through the window, she could see the elm trees lining Main Street, their leaves dusty and still in the windless day. This small Pennsylvania town had been her home for 2 years now, ever since her husband deployed overseas with his unit. The deployment that was supposed to last 6 months had stretched into 18, and every day felt longer than the last. She touched the silver locket around her neck, feeling the warmth of the metal against the skin. Inside was a photo of Marcus in his dress uniform, taken the day before he left. His smile in that picture never failed to make her heart ache with both love and longing. The letters came regularly, but they were heavily redacted, full of black bars that hid the truth of what he was facing. All she knew was that he was somewhere dangerous, doing something important, and that he missed her as much as she missed him. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Sarah looked up with her practiced customer service smile. 3 men walked in, and her smile faltered slightly. She recognized them immediately. Everyone in Millbrook knew the Cordero brothers and their associate, Tommy Vance. They were trouble-wrapped in leather jackets and false charm. The oldest, Rico, had a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a bar fight 2 towns over. His younger brother, Danny, was stockier and meaner, with dead eyes that never seemed to blink. Tommy was the worst of them, always grinning like everything was a joke only he understood. They took a booth in the corner, their loud voices immediately filling the quiet diner. The only other customer, old Mr. Peterson, quickly paid his bill and left. Sarah noticed but said nothing. She had dealt with difficult customers before. She walked over with menus in her order pad, keeping her expression neutral and professional. Rico looked up at her, his eyes traveling slowly from her feet to her face in a way that made her skin crawl. Well, Sarah Mitchell, how's that soldier boy of yours doing? Still playing hero in the sandbox? His companions laughed, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had learned to ignore comments about Marcus, had developed a thick skin over the months. This town had its share of people who didn't understand or appreciate military service. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. Danny leaned back in his seat, his arms spread across the back of the booth. "You know what I find funny? Guy leaves his pretty wife all alone for years. That don't seem right. What kind of man does that?" Tommy joined in, his grin widening. Maybe he just don't care. Maybe he found himself some company overseas. Sarah's hand tightened on her order pad until her knuckles turned white. She had endured whispers and pitying looks, had smiled through awkward questions and uncomfortable silences. But this was different. This was deliberate cruelty, designed to hurt. "I'll give you a minute to decide," she said, turning away. Rico's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. "We're talking to you." Rude to walk away when someone's talking. The diner suddenly felt very small and very isolated. Through the window, Sarah could see the empty street, the closed shops observing their afternoon siesta in the heat. Her manager had left early for a dental appointment. She was alone with these 3 men who had no respect for boundaries or decency. She pulled her wrist free, her heart pounding. "Let go of me." Rico stood up slowly, his full height towering over her. "Oh, what? You gonna call your husband? Oh, wait, you can't." He's too busy getting shotted because he was stupid enough to sign up. The other 2 laughed again, and Sarah felt something break inside her. Not her spirit, but her patience. She had been strong for so long, had held everything together while her world felt like it was falling apart. And now these men, these worthless excuses for human beings, thought they could mock the sacrifice Marcus was making. "Get out," she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She looked Rico directly in his scarred face and repeated herself, "Get out of my diner." The smile slid off his face like oil off water. Danny and Tommy stood up too, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Rico stepped closer, invading her space deliberately. "Your diner? Last I checked, you just work here, sweetheart. And we're customers. So you're gonna take our order, bring our food, and keep that pretty mouth shut about what we say. Understand?" What happened next will be talked about in Millbrook for years to come. Sarah picked up the coffee pot from the nearby warmer and held it like a weapon. I said, get out. This is your last warning. Rico's face flushed red with anger. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a woman he had decided was weak and vulnerable. His hand moved toward her again, and Sarah knew she was about to be in serious trouble. The diner's bell chimed once more, and everyone froze at the sound. The man who walked through the door looked like he had been carved from granite and disappointment. He was average height, but built like someone who had spent years turning his body into a weapon. His head was shaved clean, and his gray T-shirt stretched across a chest that suggested he could bend steel bars for entertainment. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. They were cold, calculating, and completely aware of everything happening in the room within a single glance. Those eyes took in the three men, Sarah with her coffee pot raised, and the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. He moved to the counter without acknowledging the confrontation, his boots making soft sounds against the checkered linoleum. When he sat down on one of the stools, he did so with the casual confidence of someone who had never been afraid of anything in his life. Sarah stood frozen, unsure whether to feel relieved or more anxious. Rico glanced at the newcomer, sized him up quickly, and apparently decided he wasn't worth worrying about. That was his first mistake. We were just having a conversation with the waitress, Rico said loudly, directing his words at the stranger as much as Sarah. Nothing that concerns you, mate. The British accent in that last word was mocking. The stranger said nothing. He simply turned his head slowly to look at Rico, and something in that gaze made the bigger man take an involuntary step backward. It was a look of a predator evaluating prey, deciding whether something was worth the effort of killing. Sarah carefully set down the coffee pot, her hands finally starting to shake now that she had a witness. "I'll be right with you, sir," she said to the stranger, her voice cracking slightly. He nodded once, a minimal movement, and turned his attention to the menu on the counter. But Sarah could tell he was listening to everything, watching everything in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser in front of him. Danny, who had less sense than his brother, decided to push things further. "You deaf, old man? She's busy dealing with us. You can wait your turn." The stranger picked up the menu, his movements unhurried and precise. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, with a distinct British accent that seemed out of place in this American town. "The lady asked you to leave. Seemed straightforward enough." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Rico's face went from red to purple. "You want to be a hero? That it? Want to impress the lonely soldier's wife?" He said those last words with such venom that Sarah flinched. The stranger set down the menu carefully, aligned it perfectly with the edge of the counter, and stood up. He wasn't tall, maybe 5'10", but the way he carried himself made him seem much larger. He turned to face the three men fully, and Sarah saw something in his posture that reminded her of Marcus. It was the stance of someone with military training, someone who had been in real danger and survived. "Here's what's going to happen," the stranger said in that same quiet voice. "You three are going to apologize to this woman. Then you're going to leave and never come back. And if I hear that you've bothered her again, or anyone else in this town, I'm going to be very disappointed." Tommy laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The stranger's expression didn't change. Someone who keeps his promises. Rico cracked his knuckles, a theatrical gesture meant to intimidate. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you. Math doesn't work in your favor. Tough guy." The stranger sighed, and for a moment, Sarah saw something like sadness in his eyes. "It never does," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Then he moved, and the world exploded into violence. He crossed the distance of Rico in 2 steps, faster than Sarah would have thought possible for a man his size. His fist connected with Rico's solar plexus with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a side of beef. Rico folded in half, all the air driven from his lungs, and collapsed to his knees gasping. Danny reached for something in his jacket, but the stranger was already there, grabbing Danny's wrist and twisting it in a way that made a sickening pop. Danny screamed, and the knife he had been reaching for clattered to the floor. Tommy was the only one left standing, and to his credit, he actually tried to fight. He threw a wide haymaker that the stranger ducked under effortlessly. The return punch caught Tommy on the jaw and spun him completely around. He crashed into a table, sending salt shakers and menus flying. The whole thing had taken less than 15 seconds. 3 men who had terrorized Millbrook for months were now on the ground, groaning in pain and shock. The stranger walked calmly back to his stool and sat down. He picked up the menu again as if nothing had happened. Sarah stood behind the counter, her mouth open, trying to process what she had just witnessed. It had been like watching a choreographed dance, except this was real and the consequences were groaning on her floor. Rico struggled to his feet, one hand pressed against his stomach, his face pale and sweating. "You're dead," he wheezed. "You understand? You're a dead man." The stranger didn't even look up from the menu. "I'll have the turkey club. Whole wheat if you have it. And coffee. Black." Sarah found herself moving on autopilot, writing down the order with shaking hands. Rico gathered his brother and Tommy, all 3 of them moving like injured animals, shooting murderous looks at the stranger who continued to ignore them completely. At the door, Rico turned back one last time. "This isn't over." "Yes," the stranger said quietly, still studying the menu. "It is. You just don't know it yet." After they left, the diner felt eerily quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. Sarah stood behind the counter, her legs suddenly weak. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come in when you did." The stranger finally looked at her directly, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition, not of her specifically, but of something she represented. "You're married to a soldier," he said. It wasn't a question. She touched her locket instinctively. "How did you know?" He nodded toward her hand. "Wedding ring on a chain. You wear it around your neck instead of your finger. Common with military spouses. Safer that way. Less likely to get caught on something. Less likely to attract the wrong kind of attention." Sarah pulled the locket out from under her uniform. "He's deployed. Special Forces. I don't even know exactly where." The stranger's expression softened slightly. "Special Forces. That explains the caliber of man. Those who can't handle their women being strong marry weak women. Takes a certain kind of strength to be with someone strong." It was the most he had said since entering, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected understanding. "I'm Sarah," she said. "Sarah Mitchell." He nodded. "Call me John." She knew immediately that wasn't his real name, but she didn't challenge it. "What brings you to Millbrook, John?" He was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if he would answer. Passing through, he finally said, "On my way to nowhere in particular." There was a story there, she could tell. A history written in scars she couldn't see and experiences she couldn't imagine. She poured his coffee and put his order in through the kitchen window. The cook, Jesus, had apparently hidden in the back during the confrontation and was now peering out nervously. Sarah gave him a reassuring wave and turned back to John. "Those men, the Corderos, they've been causing trouble in this town for a long time. Nobody stands up to them." John sipped his coffee, grimacing slightly at the temperature. "Someone should have a long time ago. Bullies are like infections. Ignore them and they spread." Night fell over Millbrook like a curtain dropping on the first act of play. Sarah locked the diner's front door at 9:30, bone-tired and emotionally drained. John had stayed until closing, drinking coffee and eating his sandwich in silence. He had left her a $50 tip on a $15 meal and walked out into the gathering darkness without another word. She had watched him go, wondering if she had imagined the entire afternoon. The bruised knuckles on her hand from gripping the coffee pot so hard told her otherwise. The drive home took her past the train tracks and the old textile factory that had closed down 5 years ago, leaving half the town unemployed. Her apartment was in a converted house on Maple Street, nothing fancy but clean and affordable. As she pulled into her parking spot, her headlights swept across a familiar truck parked across the street. Her stomach dropped. It was Rico's truck, a jacked-up Ford with custom paint and oversized tires. The kind of truck that announced its owner's insecurity from a mile away. Sarah sat in her car, engine running, debating her options. She could drive to the police station, but Chief Morrison was Rico's uncle by marriage and had made it clear many times that he didn't appreciate troublemakers. In his mind, Sarah was a troublemaker for pressing charges 3 months ago when Tommy had grabbed her outside the grocery store. Those charges had been mysteriously dropped due to lack of evidence, despite the security camera footage. She could call someone. But who? Her parents were 3 states away, and her friends in town had their own problems. She thought of Marcus, somewhere in a desert or jungle or mountain range, facing dangers she couldn't even imagine. He would want her to be smart, to be safe. He would also want her to be strong. She turned off her engine, grabbed her purse, and walked toward her front door with her keys laced between her fingers like her self-defense instructor had taught her. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of a television and someone's wind chimes tinkling in the breeze that had finally risen with sunset. She made it to her door without incident, but as she turned the key in the lock, she heard footsteps behind her. Fast footsteps. She spun around, her makeshift weapon raised, and came face to face with Danny Cordero. His right arm was in a sling, and his face was mottled with bruises. Behind him, Tommy emerged from the shadows, moving stiffly and favoring his left side. Rico was nowhere to be seen, and somehow that was more terrifying than if all 3 had been present. "You think you're smart," Danny said, his voice thick with pain and rage. "Getting your boyfriend to fight for you? That British piece of trash sucker punched us. Caught us off guard. Won't happen twice." Sarah's hand tightened on her keys. "Leave me alone. I didn't do anything to you. That man was just a customer who saw you harassing me." Tommy spat on the ground beside her welcome mat. "You embarrassed us. Made us look weak in front of the whole town. By tomorrow, everyone's gonna know we got our asses kicked by some tourist. That's on you." The injustice of the accusation would have been funny if Sarah hadn't been so frightened. They had started everything, had gone out of their way to torment her for no reason other than cruel entertainment, and now they were acting like victims. "Where's your hero now?" Danny asked, stepping closer. "Where's that tough guy when you actually need him?" Sarah's back was against her door now, with nowhere to go. "The police," she started to say, but Tommy cut her off with a harsh laugh. "The police? You mean Chief Morrison? Rico's talking to him right now. Filing assault charges against your British buddy. Self-defense, we're gonna say. He attacked us unprovoked. With your boyfriend overseas, guess you got lonely and desperate for tension. Brought in some muscle to impress you." The way they were twisting the narrative made Sarah's blood boil. "That's not what happened, and you know it." Danny shrugged his good shoulder. "Don't matter what happened. Matters what people believe. And people in this town believe us. We grew up here. We got family here. You're nobody. Just some soldier's wife counting days until he comes home in a box." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The fear that lived in her constantly, the nightmare that woke her in the middle of the night soaked in sweat, was a phone call or the knock on the door that would change her life forever. And these men were weaponizing that fear, using it to hurt her because they could. Something inside her shifted. The fear didn't go away, but it was joined by something else. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. "You're pathetic," she said clearly. "Both of you. You act tough because you've never faced anyone who could fight back. You target women and old people and anyone you think is weak. But you're the weak ones. You're cowards hiding behind your family name and your uncle's badge." The slap came so far she didn't have time to dodge. Danny's good hand cracked across her face, snapping her head to the side and making stars explode in her vision. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. "You need to learn respect," Danny said, and Sarah saw him raising his hand again. She tried to duck, but Tommy grabbed her arms from behind, holding her in place. This was it. She realized with a strange clarity. This was the moment where things got truly bad. She opened her mouth to scream, hoping someone would hear, someone would care enough to call for help. Danny's hand descended in what felt like slow motion, and Sarah closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. It never came. She heard a sound like a watermelon being hit with a hammer, and Tommy's grip on her arms vanished. She stumbled forward, caught her balance, and opened her eyes to see John standing in the middle of the street. He was holding Danny by the throat with one hand, lifting the bigger man completely off the ground. Danny's feet kicked uselessly in the air, his good hand scrabbling at John's wrist. Tommy was on the ground, curled in a fetal position, and making sounds like a wounded animal. "I was having dinner," John said conversationally, as if he wasn't currently choking a man to death. "Nice little Chinese place 2 blocks over. Decent General Tso's chicken, though they used too much cornstarch in the sauce. Then I thought to myself, those three gentlemen from the diner didn't seem like the type to learn their lesson the first time. Figured they might need a more thorough education. He looked at Sarah, his expression neutral. "You all right?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her face throbbed where Danny had hit her, and she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. John turned his attention back to Danny, whose face was turning an alarming shade of purple. "Here's what's going to happen," John said in that same quiet, reasonable voice. "I'm going to put you down. You and your friend are going to get in your truck and drive. Keep driving until you're out of Pennsylvania. If you ever come back to this town, if you ever speak Sarah's name again, if you ever even think about her, I will find you, and what happened today will seem gentle in comparison." He lowered Danny to the ground slowly. The younger man collapsed immediately, gasping and coughing, his hand going to his bruised throat. John stepped over him and walked to Sarah. Up close, she could see he wasn't even breathing hard. Whatever violence he had just committed hadn't affected him physically at all. "Let's get you inside," he said gently. "You should ice that face." Sarah's hands were shaking too badly to unlock the door, so John took her keys and did it for her. Behind them, Danny and Tommy were helping each other up, moving with the slow uncertainty of men who had just realized they were completely outmatched. Sarah heard Rico's truck start up, the engine roaring to life, and then the squeal of tires as they fled into the night. John ushered her inside, locked the door behind them, and turned on the lights. Her apartment was small but tidy, decorated with photos of Marcus and Memento from the life they had been building together before the deployment. John moved through the space with professional efficiency, checking windows and sight lines, his presence somehow both comforting and intimidating. He found ice in her freezer, wrapped it in a dish towel, and handed it to her. "Hold this against your cheek," he instructed. "You'll bruise, but the swelling should stay minimal." Sarah pressed the ice to her face, wincing at the cold. "How did you know they would come here?" John sat down in the armchair across from her couch, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "Because that's what men like that do. They don't accept defeat. They escalate. I've known 1,000 men like the Corderos. Different names, different faces, same rutting core." He pulled out his phone and took a photo of her face. "Evidence," he explained, "in case you need it later." "The police won't do anything," Sarah said bitterly. "Chief Morris and his family." John's expression hardened slightly. "Then we'll go around the police. State police, FBI if necessary. Assault, stalking, harassment. These things leave paper trails. But right now, you need to decide something." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Do you want to press this? Really press it? Because if you do, it's going to get harder before it gets easier." Sarah sat on her couch holding the ice to her face, studying the man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't quite articulated. In the light of her apartment, she could see details she had missed before. Scars on his knuckles, old and white. A jagged line along his jawline, partially hidden by stubble. The way his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and threats and angles. This was not a man who had lived a normal life. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "And don't say John. That's not your real name." He was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years and regrets. "My name is James Collier. Most people who know me call me Cole. I was in the British Special Air Service for 12 years. Spent time in places that don't officially exist, doing things that never officially happened." He stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the quiet street. "I retired 3 years ago. Or I tried to. Turns out when you spend your whole adult life being a weapon, it's hard to figure out what else you're supposed to be. So I drive. Town to town, nowhere in particular, trying to find something that feels like a purpose." He turned back to her, and Sarah saw genuine sadness in his eyes. "Most days I'm just killing time until time kills me." The raw honesty of the statement made Sarah's throat tight. "Why did you help me? You don't know me. This isn't your problem." Cole returned to his chair, and for a moment he looked very tired. "I knew a soldier once. Good man. One of the best I ever served with. He got married right before our last deployment. Talked about his wife constantly. Showed everyone pictures. Made us all promise that if something happened to him, we would make sure she was taken care of. He paused, and Sarah saw his jaw clench. Something did happen. Roadside bomb. He took the brunt of it, protecting the rest of us. Died before the medic could even reach him. When we got back, I went to see his wife. Planned to tell her what a hero he was, how he saved 6 lives with his sacrifice. Found out she had been evicted from their apartment because the death benefits hadn't come through yet. Was living in her car, working 2 jobs, being harassed by her landlord for money she didn't have. Sarah felt tears running down her face, mixing with the melted ice water from a towel. What did you do? Cole's expression was unreadable. I had a conversation with the landlord. He decided to forgive the debt. Then I had a conversation with the benefits office. Suddenly the paperwork moved much faster. Then I stayed for a while, made sure she was safe, got her connected with resources, helped her get back on her feet. He looked directly at Sarah. When I walked into that diner and saw you standing there with those 3 pieces of garbage talking to you that way, I saw her. I saw every military spouse who holds everything together while their partner is in harm's way. And I remembered my promise. The weight of that revelation settled over the room. Sarah understood now. This wasn't about her specifically. This was about Cole's own ghost, his own need for redemption or purpose, or maybe just a way to honor the memory of a fallen friend. What was his name? She asked. Your friend who died. Cole smiled slightly, the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. Thomas Whitmore. Everyone called him Tommy, which he hated because it sounded too young. He was 32 when he died. Left behind a wife named Elizabeth and a daughter he never got to meet. She was born 6 months after he was killed. Sarah pulled out her phone and found the photos Marcus had sent her. She showed Cole pictures of her husband in uniform, in casual clothes, laughing with his unit. This is Marcus. We've been married 4 years. His special forces. Like you said, this is his 3rd deployment, but the longest. I don't even know exactly where he is. Somewhere in East Africa, I think, but they can't tell me specifics. Cole studied the photos carefully. He looks like a good man. Strong face. You can tell a lot about someone by their eyes. His eyes are clear, honest. They talked for hours after that. Cole told her about his time in the SAS, the operations he could discuss and the ones he couldn't. Sarah told him about Marcus, about their courtship and marriage, about the constant fear that lived in her stomach like a stone, about the loneliness of military life, the friends who didn't understand why she didn't just ask him to leave the service, the relatives who thought she was foolish for marrying a soldier in the first place. As the night deepened, Sarah felt something shift. The apartment didn't feel so empty. The fear didn't feel so overwhelming. Around midnight, Cole's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression darkened. We have a problem, he said, showing Sarah the screen. It was a text from an unknown number with a photo attached. The photo showed Sarah's car, and written on the dusty hood in what looked like blood were the words, "Dead by morning." Cole was already moving, checking windows and doors again. They are escalating faster than I thought. Rico isn't just angry anymore. His planning. Sarah's brief sense of security evaporated. What do we do? Cole was typing rapidly on his phone. I have friends. People I serve with who live nearby. They can be here in an hour. In the meantime, we make this place as secure as possible and we wait. He looked at her seriously. This is going to get worse before it gets better. These men feel cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Sarah thought about Marcus, about the leap of faith she had taken marrying a man who lived a life of constant danger, about the trust required to love someone who regularly walked into the valley of death. Yes, she said firmly. I trust you. Cole nodded, satisfied. Good, because they are coming tonight, probably bringing friends. And we're going to need to send a message strong enough that they never bother you again. The next hour was a blur of activity. Cole moved furniture, creating defensive positions. He found tools in Sarah's garage and reinforced the front door. He taught her basic defensive positions, where to go if shooting started, how to stay low and stay alive. I don't have a gun, Sarah said apologetically. Cole pulled up his shirt slightly, revealing a handgun tucked into his waistband. I do. Hopefully we won't need it. At 1:15 in the morning, Cole's phone buzzed again. He checked it and allowed himself a small smile. Cavalry's here. Sarah looked out the window and saw 3 vehicles park on her street. 6 men got out, all of them moving with the same purposeful efficiency as Cole. They were different ages and builds, but they all had that same look in their eyes. Warriors, soldiers, men who had seen too much and done too much to ever be completely comfortable in the civilian world. Cole opened the door and greeted them quietly. They moved through the house in pairs, securing positions, checking field of fire. One of them, a black man in his 40s with sergeant stripes tattooed on his forearm, approached Sarah. I'm Marcus Hendricks. Cole called. We came. That's what we do. He said it simply, as if driving through the night to help a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps for men like this, it was. Thank you, Sarah said, overwhelmed. I don't know how to repay you. Another man, younger with a thick Boston accent, laughed quietly. Cole saved my life in Somalia. Then he saved it again in Syria. I owe him about 6 lifetimes. This is nothing. The third man, silent and watchful with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light, just nodded at her. These men were a brotherhood, bound by experiences she couldn't imagine and a code she barely understood. Cole gathered them in the kitchen, speaking in low tones. Sarah caught fragments. 3 confirmed hostiles, possibly more. Rico Cordero, Danny Cordero, Tommy Vance. Local enforcers, connected to the police chief. History of violence, mostly against soft targets. Escalating pattern, making threats. Objective is to neutralize the threat permanently without creating legal complications. The men nodded, asking tactical questions, dividing responsibilities. This was their language, their world. Hendricks looked at Sarah with kind eyes. We're going to set up outside. Create a perimeter. If your friends show up, we'll have a conversation with them. Probably going to be loud. Probably going to be scary. But you'll be safe. That's a promise. Sarah believed him. How could she not? These men had appeared out of nowhere because one of their own had called. They were here because they honored promises and protected those who couldn't protect themselves. At 2:30, the street erupted with sound. Sarah heard engines, multiple vehicles, arriving fast. She peeked through a crack in the curtains and saw Rico's truck along with 2 other vehicles. 8 men total, some of them carrying what looked like baseball bats and tire irons. They spread out, surrounding her house, clearly planning to break in from multiple directions simultaneously. Contact, she heard someone say quietly through a radio. 8 hostiles, armed with improvised weapons, preparing to breach. Then Cole's voice, calm and clear. Gentlemen, you're making a mistake. The men outside froze. Suddenly lights came on, illuminating the street. Cole and his team emerged from positions Sarah hadn't even known they were occupying. On rooftops, behind cars, in shadows. They moved with perfect coordination, weapons drawn but pointed at the ground. They looked like what they were, professional soldiers confronting amateur thugs. The difference was stark and immediate. Rico tried to bluster. This is none of your business. This is between us and her. Cole walked forward until he was face to face with Rico. Wrong. This is very much my business. You threatened a military spouse. You committed assault. You made terroristic threats. Any one of those is enough. All 3 together. That's a pattern. And patterns get attention. Federal attention. One of Rico's friends, bigger than the others and clearly drunk, swung his bat at Cole. It was a clumsy telegraph swing that Cole avoided easily. In one smooth motion, he disarmed the man, swept his legs, and had him face down on the pavement with his arm twisted behind his back. Don't, Cole said quietly. The man whimpered in pain and submission. The whole thing had taken 3 seconds. The other men stopped moving. They had thought they were coming to terrorize a lone woman. Instead, they had found themselves outmanned, outgunned, and massively outmatched. Here's what happens now, Cole said, his voice carrying in the quiet street. You leave. You never come back. You never speak Sarah Mitchell's name again. You forget this address exists. In exchange, we don't call the state police right now with video evidence of you attempting to commit home invasion. Because yes, we're recording everything. He gestured, and Sarah saw one of the other soldiers holding a phone, clearly filming. You also don't file any false police reports with your tame chief. Because if you do, this video goes viral, goes to the news, goes to the FBI, and then we have a very different conversation. The kind that ends with you in federal prison. Do you understand? Rico's face went through several colors, but he wasn't stupid. He was beaten and he knew it. We understand, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Dawn broke over Millbrook in shades of gold and amber, the kind of beautiful sunrise that promised a perfect summer day. Sarah stood on her front porch holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, watching Cole and his team pack up their vehicles. The street looked peaceful, almost innocent, showing no signs of the confrontation that had taken place just hours before. The only evidence was some disturbed gravel and a few drops of what might have been blood on the pavement where Rico's drunk friend had hit the ground. Hendricks was the first to say goodbye. He shook Sarah's hand firmly, the grip warm and reassuring. Cole has our number. Anything happens, anything at all, you call. We can be here in 90 minutes. That's a promise. The quiet man with the glowing eyes simply nodded at her again, but somehow that nod felt like a blessing. The Boston guy gave her a salute that was half serious, half mocking. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Mitchell. Your husband's lucky to have you. Then they were gone, their vehicles disappearing down Main Street as the town began to wake up around them. Cole remained, leaning against his nondescript sedan, watching Sarah with those calculating eyes that seemed to see everything. The morning light made him look older, highlighting the lines around his eyes and the gray stubble on his jaw. He looked exhausted but satisfied, like a man who had completed a difficult job well. You should file a police report, he said finally. Not with Morrison. Go to the state police barracks in Harrisburg. Take the photos. Tell them everything. Create a paper trail. Sarah nodded, knowing he was right but dreading the process. Will they believe me? The Corderos have roots here. Family connections. I'm just an outsider. Cole pushed off from his car and walked up the porch steps. That's why you have video evidence. That's why you have witnesses. That's why you have me. I'll testify if needed. So will the others. These men made a mistake when they escalated to terroristic threats. That's federal jurisdiction if necessary. The local police chief can't protect them from that. He handed her a card with a phone number written on it in neat handwriting. This is my number. Keep it somewhere safe. If you ever need help, call. Day or night, doesn't matter. I'll answer. Sarah took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. Why are you doing all this? Really? Is it just about your friend who died? Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Tommy was part of it. But honestly, I spent 12 years of my life doing terrible things to terrible people in the name of protecting good people I would never meet. It was abstract. Necessary, but abstract. He looked at her directly, and Sarah saw something raw and honest in his expression. You're not abstract. You're real. A real person being hurt by real bullies, and I actually had the power to do something about it. In a world where I can't fix most problems, where my skills are mostly useless in civilian life, this is something I can do. This matters. You matter. The simple sincerity of his words made Sarah's eyes blur with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for giving me my life back. Cole smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. You already had your life. You were just dealing with parasites. We removed them. That's all. He glanced at his watch. I should go. Got a long drive ahead of me. Sarah felt a sudden panic at the thought of him leaving. Where will you go? He shrugged. West, I think. Maybe Montana. I hear it's beautiful this time of year. Quiet. Lots of open space to think. Before he could leave, Sarah did something impulsive. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly. For a moment, Cole stood stiff in surprise, clearly not used to physical affection. Then slowly, carefully, he hugged her back. You saved my life, Sarah said into his shoulder. I won't forget that. Ever. When they separated, Cole's eyes were suspiciously bright. Your husband saves lives every day. He's the real hero. I just cleaned up some local trash. He walked to his car, opened the door, then paused. Sarah, when Marcus comes home, and he will come home, You tell him something for me. Tell him that there are people all over this country who honor his sacrifice, who see what military families endure, who will stand up for them when they need it. Tell him he's not alone, and neither are you. We take care of our own." Then he was in his car, engine starting, pulling away from the curb. Sarah watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner, carrying him toward whatever destination called to him next. The diner was busy that morning when Sarah arrived for her shift. Word had spread fast in small-town fashion, though the details had gotten garbled in translation. Some people said there had been a gang war in the street. Others claimed federal agents had raided the Cordero house. The truth, as usual, was somewhere in between and more complicated than anyone knew. What everyone did know was that Rico, Danny, and Tommy had left town in the middle of the night. Their families were tight-lipped about where they had gone or when they might return. Chief Morrison came into the diner around 10, his face carefully neutral. He ordered coffee and sat at the counter, not quite looking at Sarah. "Heard there was some trouble at your place last night," he said carefully. Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Did you? That's funny, because no one called you. Makes me wonder how you heard about it." The chief's jaw tightened. "My nephew called me. Said some British lunatic attacked him and his friends unprovoked." Sarah poured his coffee with a steady hand. "That's interesting, because what actually happened was your nephew and his friends attempted to break into my home at 2:30 in the morning with weapons. There were 8 of them. They were caught on video making terroristic threats and attempting home invasion. The state police in Harrisburg have copies of that video now. So do the FBI field office in Philadelphia. So does my lawyer. So does a local news station." She leaned forward slightly. "Want to tell me again about how they were attacked unprovoked?" The color drained from Morrison's face. He understood immediately that the situation had escalated beyond his control. Whatever protection he could offer his family within Millbrook meant nothing against state and federal charges backed by video evidence. "Sarah, I'm sure we can work something out. Boys will be boys. Things got out of hand. No need to involve all these outside agencies." Sarah cut him off. "No, way past that. Your nephews and their friend terrorized me for months. They assaulted me. They threatened to kill me. And you did nothing because they are family. Well, now it's out of your hands." She straightened up, her voice growing stronger. "And if anything happens to me, if I have a mysterious accident, if my apartment catches fire, if I disappear, there are 6 highly trained former Special Forces soldiers who will come looking for answers. They'll tear this town apart until they find the truth. They don't care about family connections or who knows who. They care about justice. So you need to make sure everyone in your family understands that I'm untouchable now. Completely untouchable." Morrison stood up without drinking his coffee. His hand shook slightly as he put money on the counter. "You've made enemies today, Sarah." She smiled without humor. "No, Chief, I've made allies. There's a difference." He left without another word, and Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she had been carrying. For the first time since Marcus deployed, she felt truly safe. Not because the threats were gone entirely, but because she knew she wasn't alone anymore. She had proven she could stand up for herself, and she had people who would stand beside her when needed. The weeks that followed brought changes to Millbrook. The Cordero brothers didn't return, and rumors that they had moved to Florida to stay with distant relatives. Tommy Vance was arrested in Delaware on outstanding warrants Sarah hadn't even known about. Chief Morrison announced his early retirement, citing health reasons. The town council appointed a new chief, a woman who had served in the Marine Corps and had zero tolerance for corruption or nepotism. Small victories, but Sarah celebrated each one. She filed formal complaints, gave statements, cooperated with investigators. The process was exhausting and sometimes demeaning, forcing her to relive trauma repeatedly. But she persisted because Cole had been right about paper trails and documentation. She created a record that would protect not just herself but any other woman these men might target in the future. Other people in Millbrook began coming forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation by the Corderos. Sarah became a reluctant symbol of resistance, proof that bullies could be defeated. Life settled into a new normal. Sarah continued working at the diner, saving money for when Marcus came home. She took self-defense classes at the community center. She connected with other military spouses through online support groups, sharing her story and offering encouragement. The apartment felt less empty now, filled with plans and hope for the future instead of fear and loneliness. She still missed Marcus desperately, still counted the days until his return, but she felt stronger in his absence. 3 months after that terrible night, Sarah's phone rang at 6 in the morning. She answered groggily, expecting a wrong number or telemarketer. Instead, she heard a voice she had dreamed about every night for 18 months. "Baby, it's me. I'm coming home." Marcus sounded exhausted but alive, gloriously alive. Sarah started crying immediately, unable to form words. "I know," Marcus said softly. "I know. Just 2 more weeks. They are flying us to Germany for debrief, then stateside. 2 more weeks and I'm all yours." They talked until his calling card ran out, cramming months of longing and love into 20 precious minutes. When the call ended, Sarah sat in her kitchen as sunrise painted the walls gold, feeling more complete than she had in over a year. Marcus was coming home. Not just surviving, but truly coming home, ready to rebuild their life together. Everything they had endured, every lonely night and fearful day, had been leading to this moment. The day Marcus's plane landed, Sarah drove to military base 3 hours away, arriving embarrassingly early. She stood with dozens of other families, everyone wearing their best clothes and holding signs and balloons. When the soldiers finally emerged, tan and tired in their combat uniforms, Sarah scanned faces desperately until she found him. Marcus was thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a healing scar on his forearm. But his smile when he saw her was exactly the same, lighting up his entire face. They ran to each other through the crowd, meeting in an embrace that felt like coming home after a long exile. Sarah buried her face in his neck, breathing in his scent mixed with desert dust and military soap. "You're here," she kept saying. "You're really here." Marcus held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she didn't care at all. "I'm here. I'm home. I'm never leaving you again." It was a promise he would eventually break because the military would call again, but in that moment it was absolutely true. Driving back to Millbrook, Sarah told Marcus about the Corderos, about Cole, about everything that had happened. She watched his face carefully, worried he might be angry that she had been in danger while he was gone. Instead, his expression cycled through rage at the men who had threatened her, gratitude toward the strangers who had protected her, and fierce pride at how she had stood up for herself. "I wish I could meet this Cole guy," Marcus said finally. "Buy him a drink. Thank him properly." Sarah smiled. He's out there somewhere, driving across America, looking for his next purpose. Marcus reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Sounds lonely." Sarah squeezed back. "I think is okay with lonely. Some people need solitude to make sense of what they've seen and done. He's one of them." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, just being together, relearning the rhythm of each other's presence. That night, in their apartment with Marcus home safe beside her, Sarah checked her phone one last time before bed. There was a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words, "He came home." Then a moment later, "Congratulations. Be happy." See, Sarah showed Marcus the message. He read it, nodded slowly, and typed out a response. "Thank you for protecting her. You honored your promise. Marcus Mitchell, U.S. Army Special Forces." The reply came almost immediately. "Thank you for your service. Protect each other. The world needs good people." Then nothing more. Cole had moved on to his next town, his next purpose, his next opportunity to be the guardian that soldiers like Marcus couldn't be while they were defending freedom overseas. Sarah felt a rush of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. The world was full of evil, but it was also full of good people willing to stand against that evil. 6 months later, Sarah opened the diner one morning to find an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a wedding photo of Cole, looking uncomfortable in a suit, standing next to a smiling woman with kind eyes. On the back, written in that neat handwriting, "Found my purpose." Her name is Elizabeth, Tommy's widow. Turns out we both needed someone who understood. Getting married next month in Virginia. You and Marcus are invited if you can make it. Either way, thank you for reminding me that there are still things worth fighting for. James Collier. Sarah pinned the photo to the corkboard behind the counter, right next to pictures of her and Marcus, her parents, her friends. A reminder that heroes came in unexpected forms. That protection could arrive from nowhere when you needed it most. That the bonds formed between warriors and their families transcended distance and time and circumstance. Marcus framed Cole's card and hung it in their living room, a daily reminder of the brotherhood that had sheltered his wife when he couldn't. Years would pass. Sarah and Marcus would have children. They would move to a bigger house on the edge of town. Marcus would eventually retire from the military and become a high school teacher. Sarah would buy the diner from its original owner and rename it Mitchell's, turning it into a gathering place of military families and veterans. They would invite Cole and Elizabeth to every major life event, and Cole would attend when his own struggles with civilian life allowed. But on hard days, when the memories of that terrible time threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah would think about the moment Cole walked into the diner. The moment everything changed. The moment she learned that she was stronger than she knew, that she was not alone, and that somewhere in the world there were people who would appear like guardian angels when darkness closed in. She had been tested, and she had survived, not just because of Cole's intervention, but because she had refused to break. The story became legend in Millbrook, growing with each retelling. The gang that terrorized the town. The soldier's wife who stood up to them. The mysterious British warrior who appeared and disappeared like smoke. Most of the details were wrong in the retellings, but the core truth remained. Sometimes when you need help most desperately, when you have reached the end of your strength and the darkness seems overwhelming, someone answers. Sometimes that someone is a stranger with their own demons who sees in you a chance at redemption. Sometimes protecting one person is how you save yourself. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when Sarah stood on her porch watching the sunrise paint Millbrook in shades of gold, she would remember Cole's words, "You matter." 2 simple words that had changed everything. Because she did matter. Her life had value. Her safety had importance. And there were good people in the world willing to stand up for those who couldn't stand alone. That truth sustained her through every challenge that followed, a foundation of strength built on one man's decision to keep a promise to a fallen friend. The sun rose higher, burning away the last shadows. Sarah finished her coffee, kissed Marcus goodbye as he left for work, and prepared to open her diner. Another day in a small town, full of ordinary moments and regular people living their lives. But underneath that normalcy ran currents of connection and courage, invisible threads linking strangers across distance and time. Cole was out there somewhere, probably in another town, probably helping another person in need. The thought made Sarah smile. She unlocked the diner's door and flipped the sign to open. Through the window, she could see Millbrook waking up, people heading to work, children waiting for school buses, the daily rhythm of American life continuing unchanged. But Sarah knew better now. She knew that beneath the surface, there were warriors who walked among them, quiet guardians who asked nothing in return for their protection except the knowledge that they had made a difference, that they had honored their promises, that they had stood between innocent people and those who would do them harm. And if another young wife needed help, if another family faced threats they couldn't handle alone, if another person stood at the edge of despair wondering if anyone cared whether they lived or died, Sarah knew what to do. She had a phone number. She had contacts. She had learned from the best how to fight back, how to stand tall, how to refuse to be a victim. She would pay forward the gift Cole had given her, protecting others the way she had been protected. The cycle would continue. Good people helping good people. Warriors defending those who needed defending. That was the real story beneath the legend. Not about violence or revenge, but about a community of protectors who understood that freedom wasn't just defended on foreign battlefields. It was defended every day in small towns and big cities, in diners and apartments and quiet streets where people tried to live peaceful lives. Cole had shown her that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest battles were fought not for glory or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The first customer walked in, an elderly veteran who came every morning for coffee and toast. Sarah greeted him with a genuine smile, poured his usual order, and listened as he told her the same stories he told every day. This was her life now. This was her purpose. Serving her community, supporting other military families, being a light in the darkness for anyone who needed it. Cole had given her more than protection. He had given her an example of what it meant to live with honor even after the war was over. Outside, the day stretched ahead full of possibility. Marcus would come home that evening, and they would have dinner together. Their children would do homework at the kitchen table. Life would continue in all its beautiful, ordinary complexity. But Sarah would never forget the summer when everything changed. When a gang made the mistake of disrespecting a soldier's wife. When a guardian appeared from nowhere. When she learned that she was never truly alone, that there were people watching out for her, that the bonds of military brotherhood extended far beyond the battlefield. And somewhere on a highway headed west, James Cole Collier drove toward his next destination, his next purpose, his next chance to keep the promise he had made to a fallen friend. Behind him, Sarah Mitchell stood in her diner, strong and safe and free. Ahead of him, someone else waited who needed help, who needed protection, who needed to know that they mattered. The road stretched on endlessly, full of possibilities and second chances and opportunity for redemption. The story that began with violence and fear had transformed into something else entirely. A story about courage and connection, about strangers becoming protectors, about the invisible networks that bind good people together across distance and difference, about the simple truth that when you stand up for what's right, when you refuse to let evil win, when you protect those who cannot protect themselves, you become part of something larger than yourself. You become part of the solution. You become a light pushing back the darkness. And that light, once kindled, never truly goes out. It passes from person to person, moment to moment, creating a chain of compassion and courage that spanned the country and the years. Sarah had received that light from Cole. She would pass it on to others. They would pass it on in town. And somewhere, always, there will be someone ready to stand up, to step forward, to say, "Not on my watch when evil tried to win." That was the real ending to the story. Not an ending at all, but a beginning. The start of Sarah's new chapter, lived with confidence and strength. The continuation of Cole's journey toward peace and purpose. The ongoing cycle of protection and service that defined the best of humanity. A gang had disrespected a soldier's wife. Then Jason Statham appeared. But the story didn't end there. It never really ends. It just transforms, evolves, continues in new forms with new characters facing new challenges. The details change, but the truth remains constant. There are good people in the world, and they will fight for you when you need them most. You are not alone. You never were, and you never will be.